guys see we have the Armstrongs back? They don't know I'm going to do this. Welcome to New Life and kind of put people on the spot. Can you tell us where you've been living for the past year or 18 months?
About a year. We were living in Switzerland for my work.
Wow. And are you done with that chapter? Like, are you still...
Yeah, we're back.
For good?
Wow.
Good. Everyone's excited. Everyone's thrilled. Yes. Most of you guys, I guess some of you have been coming to New Life for a while. You will know the Armstrongs. They have been pillars of this family almost since day one. We are so glad to have you guys back. I scan the audience. I'm really glad to see you guys. Some of you I know, maybe some of you I don't know. If you are new here, please don't leave without saying hello or giving me some kind of a high five. You came at a good night. We are in week 3 of our relationship series. So we got a series called Back on Track, Reclaiming the Art of Relationships One Step at a Time. And so every week we've taken a look at a different relationship dynamic. Right? Week 1 was about friendship and how we can practically have better friendship in 2019. The studies are crazy, how lonely our culture is, how isolated we are, how now more than ever we have nobody to call. And so we try to give really practical steps on how do we get friendship back on track. Right, last week we did spouses and how to have our marriage back in the right direction. I was super blessed by being able to talk up here with my wife. Was anybody else blessed by her being up here? Does anybody remember the phrase? Oh, where's Michael Edinger? He remembered the phrase. All week, we tried to give you guys with the phrase specifically when it comes to healthy spouses. Did you guys know it? Jacqueline, he's been saying it all week. Healthy spouses initiate sacrifice. Thank you. A few of you. Was that Brian? Brian gets paid. He has to memorize that. Serena knew. Great. Healthy spouses initiate sacrifices, right? Whether it's in conflict, initiating the resolution. Whether it's in the emotional needs of your spouse, coming home and asking them about their day, allowing them to have a safe space to chat. Whether it's their physical needs of doing chores or even initiating sex, we try to encourage us that healthy spouses initiate sacrifices. And today, we're going to do how to reclaim the relationship you have with yourself. I know that kind of sounds out there. I saw little eyebrows go up. Maybe you guys didn't see it coming, but it's definitely one we need to talk about. So let's pray, and then let's dive into it. God, we are so glad that you are here with us. We don't need to invite you into this place. You've been here long before we have. And we are just so blessed to be in your presence, to be united with you, to be so close and have such intimacy with you, God. We just ask that you would speak today. God, I pray that my words would be prophetic in the sense that it would be tailored to each person. God, I pray that you would anoint me to give a message that isn't mine but is yours, and I can simply be a microphone or a megaphone to give it to your children, God. Holy Spirit, be in this place. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, open up to Mark chapter 5. This is where we're going to be. Mark chapter 5 for the majority of the time. So I was reading a book. Let me make sure I get the chapter right. So Jordan Peterson, he wrote a book called The 12 Rules of Life. And there's a chapter, and it's called chapter 2, and it said, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. That's kind of like a line twist, right? Treat yourself like as if you're responsible for someone you're helping. And in this chapter, he talks about the complicated relationship we have with self. And listen to this study that he points out. So, we've all been to the doctors and you've had a prescription written for you, right? Usually you get the prescription, maybe you go down to the first floor and there's a pharmacy. Or maybe on your way home, you go to your local Walgreens and fill that prescription. And he did a study, though, and said that 33% of all people will not even get their prescription filled. Think about that. So the doctor writes you a medication and says, you need to take this to get better. And a third of people who receive that little note will not even walk maybe 50 feet to the pharmacy and get it filled. But it doesn't stop there. He says, then of the people who get it filled, half of them aren't going to do it correctly. Meaning they're not going to take the required dosage, or they'll take it for a week and stop when it's a 30-day plan. And so what he notes is it's overwhelming. The majority of people are not going to do what the doctor ordered. And then in the chapter, he talks about the complicated ordeal of a kidney transplant. So I had a friend who had kidney failure, so I got to see this firsthand. It's a terrible, tragic thing that can even lead to death. And the way it works is if your kidney shuts down, you basically get on this list of trying to get a new kidney. But while you're on this list, you have to get dialysis. And so you get hooked up to this machine for 8 hours a day as it helps kind of circulate, clean out your blood. And then hopefully, by the grace of God, you get a match with somebody, and their kidney works for yours. Then you have surgery, you put that kidney in yours, but your body doesn't automatically accept it. Because your body thinks it's something foreign, and so sometimes your body fights it. Now they give you medication, though, to help with this process. And again, this author notes at the overwhelmingly high rate of kidney rejections, that's aka your body rejecting this new kidney, not because it wasn't a good match, but because people didn't take their medication. You wait on this list, and you wait, you get a miracle, and you get a kidney, and you have this incredible surgery where doctors are able to sew that into your body, and it fails because you don't take the little pills. He didn't contrast that with prescriptions that are written for their pets. And it's staggering how much better people are at taking care of their pets. He doesn't give the exact numbers, but he says it's about a 200% increase when it comes to the likelihood of getting that prescription filled and implementing it at the right dosage. And he ends this chapter by saying how sad is it and how much shame must be in our society that when it comes to our pet or when it comes to somebody else, we're great at taking care of them. Yet when it comes to taking care of ourselves, we really screwed up sometimes. I think you guys have all heard the famous saying, love yourself, love your neighbor as yourself. But honestly, for some of us, that's a pretty harsh sentence for our neighbor. Because of the way we view ourselves, because of the way that we treat ourselves, the things that we say. Anna, what was the line you said? That it was just in the prayer. You said what?
One of my friends confronted me one day and said, if you talked to other friends how you talk to yourself, would you have any friends? And I'm like, maybe not.
If you talk to other people like you talk to yourself, would you have any friends? It's this idea that we need to reclaim the relationship with self. Because it's damaging much more than just you. It's damaging our relationships. Are you guys with me?
Yes.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. So look at actually Romans chapter 12. This is where we're going to start, right? Romans chapter 12. You actually don't need to flip there because I'd rather you be on Mark 5. Brian, throw it up on the screen first. How do we reclaim this view of self? How do we get back on track? Romans 12:3 says, for by the grace given to me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself, so this is how to view yourself, more highly than you ought. But look at this last part. But rather, think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. I find this really fascinating that Paul, he says, hey, when thinking about yourself, like how you view yourself, how you have a relationship with who you are, do it with a sober mindset. Do it with sober judgment. The Greek word, you got it on the next screen? The sober judgment is a word called sophroneo. Can you say that with me on the count of 3? 1, 2, 3. Sophroneo. And it's honestly used for being sober. In contrast to being drunk off of wine or being intoxicated off of pills or drugs, this word sophroneo, it implies sobriety. I mean, it's really interesting that when Paul talks about viewing yourself, he puts it in terms of intoxicated or sober. And I think he's on to something here. Right, we're all familiar that you can be physically, drunk or physically intoxicated, and you can be physically sober. But Paul takes it a step further. He says, and in the same way, we can be mentally impaired and mentally sober. Are you guys with me? Do you notice that Paul does? He could have used any word he wanted. But he says, no, specifically when it comes to viewing yourself, make sure you do it with a sober mindset. Because we all know what happens when we're impaired. If you're intoxicated, you don't make as good of decisions. You're not able to perceive reality the same way. You're more likely to get in a car crash, right, if you operate in a vehicle. You're more likely to get in a fight, potentially with coworkers or family. We all know that intoxication, right, leads to damage. And Paul says, yeah, it's the same thing when you're mentally impaired. So be sober when you view yourself. Be sober when you're thinking about yourself. The opposite of sophroneo is to be drunk or intoxicated or impaired, whatever. And so I think it begs the question, and this is what I want you guys to hear me. How do we become mentally impaired when it comes to view of yourself? Are you ready? This is what I would say. When you over-consume things that are not true about you. So if someone said, okay, Matt, I kind of get this idea, right? I can get physically drunk if I drink too much wine. I can get physically drunk or intoxicated if I take too much pills, whatever. But how do you get mentally impaired? I would say by over-consuming things that are not true about you. And by doing so, Paul would say, you are no longer sober-minded. You're now impaired. You're not able to discern reality in the same way. For a lot of people, right, maybe it's the standards that the world says need to be for you. Right? Maybe for women, you need to look a certain way. And that's the standard that's been given to you. And you have over-consumed that to the point that it has left you impaired because you are not them. Or maybe, guys, you're supposed to make a certain amount of money by this stage of life, and that is the news that has fed you all day. You've consumed it at a very high rate. It's not true, it doesn't define you, but you have devoured it like it has, and it has left you impaired. You have gobbled up the lies that Satan has said. You have bought in and overconsumed the hurtful things that your coworkers said about you. I don't know what it is specifically, but I believe when we consume and overconsume things that are not true of us, it leaves us impaired. It's the opposite of sophroneo. It's the opposite of sober judgment, and it's part of the problem. And so let me show you why I like Mark chapter 5. Let's read this, because it has a twist on it that I don't think a lot of us see necessarily. Mark chapter 5, we're going to read verses 1 through 15. Ready? So they arrived at the other side of the lake, in the region of Gerasenes. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from a cemetery to meet him. This man lived among the burial caves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as often as he was, he snapped the chains from his wrists and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. When Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed low before him. With a shriek, he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the evil spirit, "Come out of the man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man." Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. "Send us into those pigs," the spirits begged. "Let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd of about 2,000 pigs plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. The herdsmen fled to the nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what had happened. Here's the part I want you guys to take note of. The crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons. And then he was sitting there, fully clothed and perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. So we get this terrifying story, right, of this demon-possessed man. He lives in isolation. He's in the burial caves. Nobody can subdue him. You tie him up with ropes, he snatches them. You can put him in chains, he breaks them. He's cutting himself, he's harming, he's howling out. It's this terrifying scene. Jesus has an encounter with him. And the story ends with it saying, this man was sitting at the feet of Jesus, perfectly sane. How many of you guys want to take a guess of what that word perfectly sane is? Stop for nail. He was sitting there, fully clothed and perfectly sane. He's sober-minded now. This man has been possessed and impaired and consumed for years and years and years. Has an encounter with Jesus. And he's left sober-minded, at peace, sitting with Jesus. And I find this story fascinating. I love that the same word between Romans and this is linked. Because I think in a way we see this juxtaposition of what it looks like to live with a sober mind and what it looks like to not. Right, the first part of the story, we see the results of this man living impaired. And then we see what it looks like to be sober-minded for him, sitting at peace at the feet of Jesus. And think about it for a second, right? I know it's kind of out there, but this man was living in the burial caves. It just implies complete isolation. This man lived completely alone. Is that not the case for some of us when we've over-consumed negativity? When we're really in that self-destructive place where all we are doing is devouring false things about you, do we not have the tendency to retreat? Do we not have the tendency to kind of dip into the shadows? Hopefully not to be seen. Almost retreat into the underworld where nobody will see the ugliness that we are cycling. It says this man is howling. It just implies a deep guttural yell. I feel like that could be said for so many of us with the anxiety attacks, with the deep hatred, the sadness, the tears that come for so many of us when we are living consumed by negativity. It even says this man was so consumed to the point that he was cutting himself. He was engaging in destructive behavior. I think we understand, right? When you practice and you consume and you devour things that are not true of you, anything is possible, even to the point of self-harm. And it might be direct self-harm like cutting, but there's other destructive practices, sleeping around just to numb out, over-consuming drugs and alcohol. You're self-harming because it feels like the only thing you can do. I find it fascinating because we would never think that we are that man. And yet if we actually stopped and were honest, we have more in common with him than we think. This man was impaired because he was consumed by these demons. Yet when we overconsume negativity and poison about ourselves, and we cycle on the hatred that we have, and we continue to do negative self-talk, we end up looking a lot like this man in isolation, deep anguish, flooded with emotions we can't control to the point of destructive behavior. It kind of stops you in your tracks. It kind of makes it real. But I love how the story doesn't end with, well, that was that man's journey. And that was his lot in life. And he lived in the tombs to the day he died. It doesn't say that. It says he has an encounter with Jesus that sobers him up, and he sits peacefully at the foot of his Lord. And so the question for us is, how do we get there? So maybe we're in the isolation stage, maybe we're in the deep howling stage, maybe we're actually at the destructive behavior stage. How do we get from there to sitting peacefully? And that's what we're going to talk about. I want to put up no, you got the math equation up there? I'm going to give you guys some illustration that hopefully will begin to make a little sense. I think naturally we all understand this. Right? Raise your hand if you like math in this room. Not many of us. Dang, Alex, you probably could solve this. You're going to backfire my argument. Okay, so I'm pretty good at math. I like math. This is one of my favorite subjects. But I'll be honest, this is way over my head. Way over my head. Right? I don't know if you guys can see, it's kind of fuzzy. We got an equation sign right here, equals. We have maybe 2 formulas here, and we got like 9 formulas on the right. This feels like some stuff out of Good Will Hunting, does it not? It's a great movie, by the way. If any of you not have seen Good Will Hunting, I give you full permission to leave right now. Nothing would make your pastor happier, because I want to be Will, but it's not that smart. Okay, so look at this. Okay, so I look at this equation, and I go, it doesn't make sense to me. But if I were to have to make a determination of does the left side equal the right side, I'd probably say no. It looks like there's a lot more going on the right than the left. There's a lot more numbers, there's a lot more variables. So based on my determination, I'm going to say this is wrong. Okay? But then imagine an MIT professor of mathematics comes up and says, no, it's right. Like, this is my specialty. I did my doctorate on this type of formula. Matt, I'm here to tell you that despite what you think, this equation, this formula is right. What's the logical conclusion for me to do next? To change my understanding. Like, I don't get it, and it doesn't make sense to me, and I still don't really see it. But if somebody, an expert in the field, says, no, Matt, it's right, then I guess I go, all right, I trust you. You know more about this than I do. I want you guys to see the next slide. I got a painting up here. Are there any abstract art fans in here? I'm about to do some hate. I don't know, make sure I'm only offending about 4 people. I don't get abstract art. I'm very kind of black and white wild. Like, I don't get this. I know I probably couldn't, but maybe it's the ego. I feel that I can do this. Does anybody else? Right? I don't get abstract art. I look at this and I go, big whoop. Not that impressive. Any kindergartner can do it. Probably worth about $20. This painting just sold for $30 million. This exact painting sold for $30 million. Now I make my determination, and I look at this, not knowing much about art, and I say, nothing special. Just a bunch of paint splattered. But then an actual person from the Louvre, I don't know, some nice art museum. You guys impressed I got that? The Louvre. Some dude from the Louvre goes, no, Matt, this is actually an incredible painting, one of the rarest in the world. It has a ton of value. Well, guess what? I go, I guess I'll change my mind. Like, doesn't mean I love it, but it clearly has value. You're smarter than me. You understand the dynamics of it more than I do. I made my determination based on my understanding. But as soon as somebody smarter than me or better in the field says, no, you're wrong, I go, I trust you. I might not see it that way, but I understand my limitations. I understand I know math this much, and I know abstract art even less. And so if you're telling me there's value, if you're telling me this is a beautiful work of art, and it's a masterpiece, and you're telling me that that equation is actually equal, I can say no. And I can say, you don't know what you're talking about. Or I can say, okay, I trust you. See, I feel like so many of us, we view ourselves as this painting. There's nothing special about me. I'm just a bunch of paint. I'm just a bunch of random colors splattered on a piece of page. Any kindergartner can do what I do. I could be replaced in a heartbeat. Would my spouse even care if I wasn't here? Would my church family give a rip if I stopped coming? Well, we see this painting, and a lot of us just impose our own self, and we say, nothing special about me. But really, what I'm trying to say is that your determination about yourself is not the truest thing about you. You are not the expert in the field of yourself. And I know that might not sound weird. You say, who knows me more than me? Who's better off to make a determination about my value than me? Well, guess what? There is somebody. And it's your Creator. It's your Father. It's His determination that actually tells you the worth. It's the mathematician's job to correct my wrong thinking about the equation. It's the professor from the Louvre and the art, guy from the Louvre to determine the value of the painting. So the real question is, go to the next slide, Noah, is what is the determination about you? What is on the other side of the you equation? If you go back to that math illustration, okay, I can't make a determination about myself, so what really is there? Let's see. I love Luke 15. You guys don't even turn there, but you better jot a note. You better read the whole chapter of Luke 15 this week. Luke chapter 15 is one of the best chapters in the entire Bible. It does three things. It starts about a story about a sheep that goes missing. And then goes to a story about a coin that goes missing. And then it goes to a story about a son that goes missing. And each time, the thing that gets lost gets more and more valuable. And 3 times, we see the same story repeated. Somebody loses something of worth, does everything possible to find it. When they're reunited with this thing of worth, they have a giant party. 3 times. God says it once, he knows we're not going to believe it. He says it twice, he knows we're going to doubt it. He says 3 times, you are this coin, you are this sheep, you are this son. What is he trying to tell us? That you are valuable. That you are worth searching for. That you are worth stopping whatever God's doing and giving up all of his plans to find you because you inherently have value. Look at Ephesians 2:10. It's God saying, I'll make a determination about you, for we are God's masterpiece. God, when given the mic, said, what are your children? 2019, all the chaos we see in the world, all the addiction, all the hurt, all the self-harm. Make a determination right now about humanity. They're my masterpiece. They're beautiful. And they take my breath away when I look at them. And they're the most precious thing in all of creation. Really? Really? Humanity is my masterpiece. Allow God to make a determination. He will say, you are beautiful. Let's see what else is on the other side of this equation. Look at 2 Corinthians 6. And I will be your father, and you will be my sons and daughters. God goes, maybe you're missing the coin analogy. Maybe you're missing the sheep. Maybe you're missing the paint. So let me take it 10 notches up. You are my child. Look at 1 John 3:10. How great is the love that the Father has lavished on us, for he calls us his children. And that is what we are. God repeatedly looks at your life and says, you are valuable. You are my masterpiece. You are my child. I will go searching for you. I will protect you. I will die for you because you are worthy of love. If you look at what's on the other side of the equation of yourself, it is you are worthy of love. For so many of us, that is not what's on the other side of our equation. We see this and we disagree. We see this like that first equation. We say, it doesn't make sense, right? Maybe I just don't get it. I have a lot of baggage, and I have a lot of stuff, and it's not. And then the creator of all the universe said, no, let me correct you. You are worthy of love, and you are beautiful, and you are valuable. And in the same way that me trying to argue with the mathematician would be silly, the same way me trying to dispute about the art would be silly, we sit and look the creator in the eyes and say, you're wrong. You got it wrong. Yeah, that's for a lot of people, but that's not for me. And what would it look like instead of just rejecting these words and determination that God puts on us? What if we actually started to say, I don't see it, but you say it, so I'm going to step into it. I'm not saying right now, with all your baggage, you need to be able to confidently say, I am lovely and I love myself. But what if the real dialogue happened between you and God and saying, I don't feel lovable. I actually feel pretty wretched. But for some reason, God, you continue to say I'm beautiful. And you continue to say that I'm valuable. we've been taking these that art picture, go back and we take it off the wall, we Sharpie on it, and we snap it over our legs, and we throw it in the trash because we think that our determination is the truest thing about that. And we do the same thing with our bodies. We self-harm, we self-criticize, we are so poisonous to ourselves. And God's going, whoa! You are a masterpiece. Stop. You are my son. You are my daughter. You say, no, God, but I know. He says, no, you don't. My voice is the loudest voice, and my voice is the truest thing about you. And the second that I stamp you worthy, stop fighting me on it. I want to show you guys a verse. Look at Psalm 139. I think this is a really good example of what sophroneo looks like. I think this is a really good example of what it looks like to be sober-minded when it comes to the view of yourself. Look at David. He says, you made all the delicate and inner parts of my body, and you knit me together in my mother's womb. Look at verse 14. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion. I was woven together in the dark of the womb. Look at verse 16. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. Verse 17. How precious are your thoughts about me, oh God. They cannot be numbered. I love that David says, you know me, you love me, you formed me, you think good thoughts about me. It's a beautiful example of sober-minded. But I know what you're saying. Well, Matt, he's probably lived a pretty good life. He hasn't had trauma. He hasn't had the things done to him that were done to me. He's pretty much got a squeaky clean past. Of course it is. He's David. Of course he can have a positive self-image. And that's just ignorance. That's not the case. David is a murderer in his past life. Took the life of another human. He's an adulterer. He's a liar. He has more of a checkered past than almost all of us in this room combined. And so to make the idea, well, of course he can have a positive self-image because of his life. It's not true. How did David, an ex-murderer, ex-adulterer, ex-liar, and present in some of those things, continue to still say, God, you think lovely things about me. God, you're so pleased with me. How did he do that? How did he not let his past affect the way he views himself? And thankfully, right, we get the journals of David in the Psalms, and we see that he constantly was spending time with his Father. His past is his past. And yet he knew, just like the man in the tombs, that sitting in the presence of God is the only way to reclaim a view of self. It is the only way, right? And if anybody knows, if we keep this kind of sober versus addicted analogy going, you guys will know that if somebody's trying to kick a habit, you can't just stop it, but you have to start something else. Have you guys ever seen that? Have you heard that? That's why a lot of people, if they're coming off of alcohol, they'll smoke cigarettes. Or if they're coming off of drugs, they'll pick up a new habit. Because the brain isn't wired to just stop something and not replace it. And so that's why you try to stop something, but then you replace it with something good. And I don't want you to think that you leave this place, you just got to stop thinking negative thoughts. I'd be so sad if your takeaway was just stop doing it. Because that won't work. And yes, that's a part of the equation. Stop over-consuming the lies that are told to you. Stop over-consuming the false labels that were placed on you. But that's not enough. It must be followed up. But I stop doing that, but I start having time with my Father. I allow him to place his words and labels on me. I sit at his feet like that demon-possessed man, and slowly but surely do I become a little more sober-minded when it comes to the view of myself. at her. I understand that some of the intake, and it's not like you chose it. You had people say these hurtful things. You had people do hurtful things to you. Just like an addict sometimes is handed a drink at a young age, or you're shown porn at a young age, and the addiction actually spurred from somebody else's doing. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to minimize it. So how did you get to this place? I know the brokenness and the majority of the self-hate and the poison that we ingest is because someone fed it to us. And as your pastor and friend, I just want to say sorry. And I'm not trying to oversimplify this. At the same time, I believe in the power of our Lord. And I believe with all of my heart that if you were to sit and say, God, what's on the other side of my equation? All I see is ugly, broken, damaged. And he would pull you in and put you on his lap and say, you are valuable, beautiful, precious, unreplaceable. And your brain might say, it doesn't make sense, God, it doesn't make sense. And he would just whisper, trust me. It doesn't have to make sense right now, but would you trust me? Because I want to help you become sober when it comes to viewing yourself. I don't know what it looks like for each and every one of us, right? I wanted this series to be practical. I think for some of us, how beautiful would it be if on our mirrors in our bathrooms it says, we are God's masterpiece. And with no makeup, as we're brushing our teeth, we stare at that and we say, I don't feel it, but I'm going to choose to believe it. And maybe it's daily ingesting some of God's affirmation. Maybe it's actually opening up God's word. Right? Because I don't want you to just think you can stop. You must replace the negative, the overconsumption of poison with something. What would it look like if you start consuming God? Before you go to work, actually reading the word. On your way in your car, listening to some music. What habits can you start doing to help balance the scales a little bit? So you stop consuming poison and start ingesting the words of your Father, who want to put nothing but good labels on you. I really, really believe that as we take a step into grace, as we allow God to speak it to us and we slowly step into us, we will start to view ourselves a little more sober. And maybe we can start treating other people with some grace. And we can come out of the caves. We can stop the howling. We can stop the self-harm. Why? Because we're valuable. We'll stop sharpening on the painting. You are that painting. God did not pay $30 million for you. He paid for you with the price of his son. And when we engage in negative self-talk, we're just slamming it over our knees. And we're just defacing it. Why? Because we feel like it's true. And no matter how many times you've done it, guess what? Father wants to pick you up and put you on his knee and say you're valuable and beautiful. God, would you help us reclaim this view of ourselves? Would you help us begin to see ourselves as you see us, as valuable, lovely, worthy children? May we, when we look at the equation of our life, may we see on the other side of that equal sign, worthy of love. God, and for those of us who do not feel that right now, Father, I know you will draw near. I know you will draw near. And we're going to do something right now. We're going to pass communion right now. Because I think there's no greater determination of your worth than the cross. There's nothing that speaks a louder word about who you are than the cross. And the way that we interact and engage with it is through communion. And when you take it, and as we prepare our hearts, I want you to realize that the price of Jesus, that you are worth it. And I know it might feel egotistical. I know it might feel weird to say I'm worth it, but you are. And if God's declared that about you, there's nothing egotistical about saying I am. So we're going to pass this. I actually want you to don't take it, just pray. We're going to sing a beautiful, beautiful song that talks about just sitting with the presence of God. And so as you guys pray, I'm going to come back up after the song and we're going to take it together. If you're new to church here, you're not even a Christian, don't worry, just let the communion pass. There's no pressure to engage. We want to keep this just for the family of believers, so no pressure. But for those of you who are, would you allow it to make a determination about you? Would you allow it to speak words over you? Because you are lovely and worthy.
I'm caught up in your presence. I just want to sit here at your feet.
not overpay for you. And I do not regret my investment in you. So we do this in remembrance of me, but before we do, whether you believe it or struggle, even as an act of faith, I'd love for you to yourself say, this bread has made me lovely. Together. And then he took the cup, symbolizing the blood, the new covenant. He's leaving the law. There's a grace abounds. And he says that this was the price that it takes to be with you and joyfully go to the cross. I don't think twice. I don't look at the sticker. Price doesn't matter because you are worth it. So before we take this, would you say, I am valuable to Jesus? We're going to sing one last song as we end today. It's called The Simple Gospel. It's just a beautiful song that highlights the relationship with Jesus. The actual union that we have. I want to remind you, it was an encounter with Jesus that sobered the man up. He spent years in isolation, in the tombs, self-harming, and yet with one encounter with Jesus, he sat peacefully at his feet. I promise you with every fiber of my soul, that same Jesus in that story is here today. And he walked in this place looking around, saying, who can I sober up today? Saying, who can I set free from the chains, from the self-harm, from the grave? Who can I do it? There was nothing different about that man and the opportunity that presented itself to him and to you today. And so if it's 5, 10, 15 years of overconsumption of negative things that aren't true about you, what if you choose to have faith that today could be the first step of sobriety? What if you chose to believe that today those shackles could be broken because Jesus is standing right here? It's one encounter with God away. So if you want to sit, if you want to stand, if you want to kneel, I don't care.